Yeah. There's that one episode where she meets the young boy with the same name and then really lives to regret it.
Well, and then I always get, like oftentimes I'll sign up for things as just Sam.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of like Sam Jones and no one knows if I'm a man or a woman until I show up. And I had a couple times where I'd sign up for something, like when I was younger, at, camps and stuff, and they'd be like, do we put you in the girls' dorm or the guys' dorm? And I get emails like, what are you?
What dorm would you like to be in?
I've got a masculine last name, and people always, it's Patricia. I always write Patricia. People would shorten it to Pat, and then they'd also expect that a man was showing up.
A man would show up, yeah.
Yeah. And I had a buddy, and his name was Laurie, for Lawrence, and he'd always get put, and he loved it because they'd put him in the girls' dorm. Oh no, I want to stay at camp.
Actually, I use your name a lot because my name's Susan, but like online and stuff, when they say, and it's something you don't really want them to be contacting you in junk, but you do want to read that bit, and you have these required fields. So I say, and when they email me, I know, oh, okay, that's from one of those sites. That's not
that's
for
not a real
real.
email.
Yes.
That's clever.
Yeah.
You're incognito.
Exactly. It was one of my nicknames in high school. My girlfriends and I used to make up different names for each other every couple of weeks or something. So when you pass notes, nobody knew. You wouldn't be embarrassed by someone finding a note saying that you like this boy or something.
We never signed our name. We recognized each other's handwriting.
Right? I know. I was busted every time for passing notes. I should have had sloppier handwriting.
Yeah.
Coming from the doctor's son, hey?
Yeah, my writing is terrible.
We were arguing about who has the worst writing the other day. So I think this is the only people who are coming. And normally we'd have Anna, Josipa, and the last two, I guess we haven't had the author come, but we tried to get the author. And what we're going to try to do from now on is to get them via Skype. So that way at least they can join us. And Josipa would have joined us via Skype, but she's in the air right now, maybe over Newfoundland. Maybe.
Coming or going?
Coming home.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know how long or anything.
Where was she from? Where'd she go?
Cambridge.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
I think she's there for a whole semester, so just here for a short visit. Yeah. So that's the scoop. So, did everybody get a chance to read the book?
I read it all except the very end, the return of bad news.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, the appendix. Yeah, I was pretty shocked at how easy it was to read, actually.
It
Oh, yeah,
is,
it's
and you know what else? He writes it exactly how he speaks.
Really, hey?
Yes.
He sounds really down to earth.
He is. Yeah.
He ran for Wild Rose, didn't he?
He ran in Cochrane.
No, you were
He ran in Cochrane for
the Liberal.
for Liberals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's the Wild Rose district.
No, that's
Oh, they
South.
ran-
Writing.
Isn't Wild Rose South?
Either way, he ran for the Liberals, right?
Yes, he did. Yes, but he ran in the Cochrane area, and he was quite surprised on how Cochrane, Canmore, all of that.
Yeah,
He was quite surprised on how big the riding was.
I bet.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, it would have been nice to meet him for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I dog-eared a whole bunch of things that was just made me go, really? One of my favorite parts was this one. A Stony child care worker who worked with Sherman said his file was disorganized, did not show respect for Sherman. She said he did not like white people telling him about healing and that he needed support, which he did not get, and that when he was at the treatment center in Manitoba, he went AWOL and called her saying that he was really lonely. She said that in the 5 years that he was with the Stony Child and Family Services, she did not get training she asked for. She felt that proper training was not available to Stony child care workers as it was to others in the province. And she also said that she was among 5 workers that were let go due to chief and council. So, seriously. Children, Indian children, just don't matter, I guess, on the reserve. But it really...
I found that was heartbreaking too, as it basically is that, and I was reading about, and I'm kind of like, how can you do that? But on the other hand I mentioned that to somebody else and they said, if you look at every immigration, like when the Italians did, when the Irish first came over, the first batch of Irish came over, and the first people that they exploited were their own people.
Right.
And basically, somebody said practically all cultures, they lift themselves up and then they exploit all their own. And so
Oh.
this is learnt behavior.
Yeah.
That's what's heartbreaking. This is learnt behavior.
He mentioned that, how basically it was the European model,
Yeah.
the
Yes.
Hi-
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say.
hierarchy,
Yeah.
patriarchy. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
the agent.
The Indian agent.
It's all the
Well,
same
and,
model.
and actually, it's not even European. Maybe it's also the British effect in India, but India also does it. Yeah.
It's hard to say it's not touched by
Yeah.
British, though, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, maybe that's the case. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it is that it goes all the way back to the British. But that's what's so sad, is that it's the exploitation. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But I mean, it's even like, I mean, there's historical roots to it, but it's just amazing how it's
It's still happening.
it's still happening, and
Mhm.
it's just that's what happens like when John Stoll leaves, then they hire totally, they start getting things going, they have new programs, and he comes back, he fires everybody,
Mhm.
and then he separates everything. That's what happens in the third world. When I was born in the Dominican Republic, a new government comes in, they fire everybody, they bring in their own cronies and their own people.
All over Africa.
Yeah.
That's,
I mean, and in some ways, actually, the U.S. is like that too. But
They are. They are like
But
that too.
that's
Yeah.
what it's just amazing how that's left to
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah, and nobody's willing to do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what I mean. I have, other than specific stuff. I mean, one question would be: is that in terms of, I mean, there's treaties, historical treaties, but to what extent should the government, who's providing funds, require more scrutiny and more audits as to what has happening in the reserve, right?
The other part that this is considered a wealthy reserve.
Oh yeah. Well,
Where
that's
the other part is that you look at all those dirt poor ones in northern Manitoba, where they don't have the resources, they don't have, and I mean, they don't have clean water either.
Yeah.
And I mean, kind of, you can't see why the government's going to step in and clean up this one, when there's so many more that are.
Well, but it's not
actually-
about cleaning
Yeah.
up and say
Yeah.
and building houses or
No.
water systems like
Yeah.
in those other ones, but it's about requiring accountability,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because this reserve, when it comes out here, even whether it's oil or the forest that was clear cut, that belongs to all the people, but it was
Yeah.
clear cut and nobody knows where
Yeah.
the funds went, except, I mean, everybody
Yeah.
knows, but nobody knows
Yeah.
officially where the funds went.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's a lot of reserves in Saskatchewan and in Alberta that have, because they have the mineral rights to the land
Yeah.
where they have, so they're wealthy and there's things coming through. But it's, in those Manitoba
Yeah.
reservations, you have to build infrastructure, you have to build housing, you have to build water treatment facilities and everything. But it's also about the accountability in a place like
Mhm.
this. They have the money, but where's the money? Like, the money's just going to a few people, and the government should, I think, and it's touchy because, like that person was saying, this was about health or treatment, but the white man, they don't want the white man interfering,
Mhm.
but so it's a touchy subject, and it's difficult how you do it. But the government, I think, should be providing a lot more accountability, more oversight as to what's happening.
Yeah. Well,
See, I've met, lawyers whose number one contract is with some of these bands, and basically is that, you'd like to say, well, if are you keeping their best interests, but they're getting filthy rich off all the off the basically the countersuits, et cetera, and so they're not going to do any. So it's such a vicious circle.
the unlimited funds for lawsuits.
Yeah.
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 Hey,
Yeah.
how long can those circles go forever?
Yeah.
At the expense of taxpayers and
Yep.
at the expense of the health and welfare of everybody on the reserve.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really a vicious circle.
And that's the other, is that, and then basically is that, somebody's paying those lawyers, but it's, it's the poor, but, what was, it was in Labrador, and the kids were sniffing gasoline.
Oh,
And they literally picked up the entire reserve and moved it because there was literally nothing. There wasn't even trapping there anymore. Yeah, and they picked it up and moved it, and I cannot remember, but I mean, those are the ones, and then the sad part of the brain damage to those kids.
Yeah,
Yeah.
forever.
Yeah.
My aunt, I'm part of the Dene Nation in
Mhm.
Yellowknife, and my aunt, she was kicked off the council because she said it was because she was exposing corruption and such. So I don't know how true that is. I never had that heart-to-heart conversation with her yet. So,
Mhm.
but yeah, it sounds like if you
Rock that, yeah.
rock that boat in any way, you're out of there. So.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. That's what's happening here as well. I mean, there's obviously
Right.
a group
Yes.
of people that are very concerned and are active in the community and are reaching out, but they just get
Bullied.
bullied,
Well, yeah.
intimidated throughout.
Mhm.
It seems that part of that solution, I liked what he talked about when he talked about having people voting for in the Alberta elections as well,
Oh,
not
yeah.
just
Yes.
within the reserve, and that might be sort of the bridge between, you know, what's going on internally in the community and then exposing that to the outside, because like some of this stuff is very shocking, and I find it hard to believe that if the general public knew, that they would just not care and not want, you know, to have funds going to help government organize or whatever they can do to make it a little bit easier.
But on the other hand, and this is where I will, is that, you know, because I do believe that you need self-government. And,
Oh, yeah.
and that's the other part, is that if the general public knew, basically, is, oh, well, we're going to go in there and clean it all up, and it's kind of like, get out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then you don't have you want it to come organically from within.
yes.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
the idea. So that's the ideal, and I do believe in self-government. At the same time, you know,
And that is the problem, and sometimes also is you have to let, you know, and sometimes it is just one person that's got the power.
yeah, oh yeah,
But it's not like, you know, and sometimes it's kind of like, well, once they've died, sometimes their legacy, their power, strength dies with them. And once they're gone, basically everybody can come, oh, thank God he's gone, right? And then basically, but you know, and hopefully that you do get in and vote the next person in. Because the reality of it is, they couldn't do any of this 40 years ago. No. And 40 years ago is that, like basically is that in the separate school system, they didn't have junior highs on this reserve. They would bus the kids to Calgary. Well, they wouldn't bus them to the closest school and have, like, you know, 6 kids go to one school so at least they had friends. They bused kids, one to every school, right? Knowing that they would die of loneliness and they would quit the second they could. And that was their game plan. And they did that for years. And how I knew that was, I had a girlfriend who was bused in every day, and she's the one who told me. She said, you know, and I'm kind of like, well, you know, how come you're the only one? She says, well, they drop everybody off at different schools. And she told me that was the game plan.
So
But
sorry.
who was doing the
Yeah, well, is it
dropping off?
is it people in the
Okay.
reservation or the government, the Alberta government doing that, or the city government,
From what I know, it was Catholic School Board.
the Catholic board?
And literally is it now, how's this? I went to St. Mary's, and this girl was bused from you know, basically the Morley Reserve to downtown Calgary. And there was one girl there was somebody dropped off at St. Greg's, somebody dropped off at St. Michael's, and they dropped somebody off at every Catholic school till they got to St. Mary's, and then the Eastern schools, they dropped them off
Like from the Gleason Reserve?
from Gleason.
Right.
Yeah. And that was school board policy, because they only had an elementary school on the reserves.
Well, they talked about in the book, basically taking the Indian out of the Indian child.
Yes,
Well,
and
that was
that was
the
residential schools.
residential schools,
Yeah.
right?
Yes,
Yep.
that was residential schools. So
And it's
that
a
when those-
just a continuation of that attitude.
It is,
Yeah.
yes, it is. And the worst part of it is a girlfriend of mine is a reporter, and in South Africa, when they wanted to figure out apartheid, they came to Canada to see how we ran our reserves. Yeah,
Oh.
I know. Doesn't that make you weep? Yeah.
Yeah, where did I heard that the other day as well.
Yeah.
Natalie, you wanted to
I was just going to say, you're talking about accountability. I think the press, if it wasn't for the press bringing up the issues and sticking on them, that was so important.
I know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was nice to see the Herald and the Sun actually do some reporting.
Mm-hmm.
And the reform candidate, what was his name? Myron
Myron Thompson.
That surprised the
Yeah.
hell out of me.
Yeah, I know, from that old
yeah.
redneck.
Yeah.
But I think it was the accountability, the using of public
Yes,
funds
that could have been
to
it.
create this situation that was not good for anybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Only a couple of families.
Yeah, it was awful.
Now, I will say, what I was quite pleased is that I volunteered at that hockey day. It was a stick hockey conference. They had it across. It's hockey tied in with Hockey Night in Canada. But anyhow, they travel around and they have all the stick hockey games. And it was up at Deerfoot Mall. So I volunteered one Saturday morning to go do that. And what I was most shocked was that basically is all of these teams were so diverse. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Because I always just, hockey used to be, the white boys. Yeah. And anyhow, it was not only diverse, there were native teams. And like we were talking, because it was miserable raining, there was one team came, and we were talking with him, he was one team, but they came down with 3 teams from around Whitehorse.
Oh, really?
Yes, and not only that, it looked like every basically there must have been 10 native teams, and everybody played well, right? They all got in there, and everybody, that was what I was so pleased to see,
Yep.
was, the diversity of people, but also is that these native teams, and there must have been, like we met the one, and who knows when the others were playing, and then we saw all the others coming and going. And I thought, you know what, even 10 years ago you didn't see that. 10 years ago you would not have seen young native teenage boys playing hockey. And it warmed my heart because I thought they're organized, if you can organize sports, you can organize an awful lot of stuff. And basically it also gives them something to look forward to. Because I know that around the Hobbema Reserve, they had a couple of NHL players would go and talk to these kids, and say, oh yes, can play hockey and make so much money, and these kids were all looking at them and saying, we get a check, what the hell do we want to, right, what would we get up and, why would we do that? We don't need to. It was kind of like, but it gives you a reason to live. Yeah, bit of a purpose.
Well, this is slightly off this area,
Yeah.
but I just thought, given that we have a new premier-elect, did anybody notice the reference to our premier-elect?
I did. I tagged it.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah, she was the justice minister.
Yes, she was.
Yeah, let me find it here. It's actually right towards the end.
Yeah, what page was that on?
196. There's he copies the brief letter that was sent from her to him, basically
Yes.
saying that it was not her responsibility.
Yeah, basically, she passed the buck.
She
Yeah.
just passed the buck.
Yeah.
So, as he says, I should be grateful that Minister Redford at least replied, even if she completely missed the point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and that's one of the problems, I think, too.
Yes.
Because it's like a hot potato. People just want to
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pass it on.
and it's not my responsibility.
No.
But
And and I also think that basically is that there's always the Minister of Indian Affairs and the 3 people he's got working for him, and because there are so many major problems,
Yeah.
and like I think to take to the streets is clean up. At least you can have safe water on reserves.
oh, absolutely.
At the very
Yeah,
least.
At
Yeah.
least have safe water on reserves.
Well, tuberculosis is
It's
a big
outrage,
issue
yeah.
because of it.
Yes.
Because they have moldy housing and such, and they don't have clean
And not
water.
all tuberculosis goes with poverty.
Yes, exactly.
And not only that, is it RCMP that work on these reserves also come down with tuberculosis. And there's strains that can't be dealt with.
Yeah.
The number of RCMP that are on long-term disability, tuberculosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's simple economic development. You can't.
Yeah.
I mean, even our Western civilization is only and this is a very simplified history, but it's not only till we start getting sanitation, proper
Yeah.
water, and,
Yeah.
clean supply of water, roads, infrastructure,
Yeah.
and education, that we progress. And I mean, if you don't have the basic necessities,
Yeah.
you can't be a functioning member of
No.
society.
There's also the community of Fort Chipewyan
Mm.
that was concerned about their water. And
Yeah, that's an oil sands issue for sure.
yes,
because they have a
There's
high
quite a
rate,
few, yeah.
I-
quite a
high
few
rate
out
of
there.
cancer there.
Yes.
And
High
I
rate.
think there's a lot of ignoring
Oh,
of
huge.
that situation.
Because
or-
everybody wants to develop the oil sands, even if it means dead DNA downstream.
Yeah.
So, and that's the thing that bothers me.
Yeah.
I think I'm not a person that calls it tar sands. I'm not a person that says we need to stop the oil sands. But I am a person that says we need to stop killing DNA downstream.
Yeah.
So that's my issue.
Mhm.
I wanted to ask you what you guys thought of this. This was one of my favorite quotes. He goes, there are those who will say that in this history and the non-Aboriginal Canadians of today should not be responsible for the wrongs of our ancestors. To these people I say that we are still enjoying what our ancestors took from these people, and we should take responsibility for what they did to these people. We are responsible for what they suffer today if we continue to do nothing about it. That was my favorite quote of the whole.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
And it's not only about what we took. I mean, you know, came here, the land, that's the one thing. We're all here right now. But it's about how things happen.
Yeah.
And one of the things somebody told me that's very involved in the Aboriginal community was that, and you know, I never thought about it this way, but you know, Western civilization, it took us 2,000 years to move into the steel, like to use what's the word? But my English is failing me now. But to move into the Iron Age and to use utensils and all this stuff and weapons and even horses. They weren't here but it took him we brought it all here, and in 5 years they had everything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it was a big shock to their culture, and at the same time we brought alcohol and everything. So it was a big shock to that culture. And anytime you shake up, you move that fast in a way, in terms of progression. It's a big shock to the culture.
The more important thing was that when the first people came here, right, they would have, they were so ill prepared for what they had. And it was the natives who basically said, oh God, you're not going to survive unless you follow us, right?
Yes.
So they showed them how to, right, what you needed to wear. So basically it was kind of like, we will show you how to survive. And those that listened survived. Those that didn't listen starved to death, froze to death, all of that, right? And basically it was kind of like, thems that came, oh yes, they showed us how to survive, but we're still going to squash them. As opposed to what we learned from these people, we wouldn't be here today. And that's the other part.
What did you guys think of the title of the book, Bad Medicine, and some of the spiritual aspects he kind
I
of
like
touched
that.
on?
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of almost like bullying, with like spiritual bullying
Oh, big
in this
time.
book that
Yeah.
he really couldn't touch on, I don't think. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Although I think he did a great job, and it's a great,
Yeah.
sort of
Especially
parallel,
when he warns where people are kind of like, oh, don't do that because you'll get bad medicine on you, you'll be right. These are people you don't fool with, type thing. And it was just because God knows what they
Well, the intimidation in the courtroom, I thought, was huge. Having people come in and walk around and do whatever they're doing, and then you have a witness that doesn't want
Yes.
to talk because they don't know what just happened in the courtroom, and they're afraid of what's going to happen to them or their family.
Well, that
or
goes
whatever.
back to gangs too. That's gangland. Yeah.
Who's the Canadian government?
What's that?
Who's the gang?
Well, but because that's the other is it like on Hobima. That's one of the biggest troubles they're having right now is actually all the gangs, and that's the others. First you get your political groups, and then you get your breakdown of gangs. So that's what witnesses aren't going to say anything because you don't know what's going to happen to them.
I got the impression that that's somewhere we might end up going by breaking up the Stony Reserve into the
I
three
agree.
different divisions. I
yeah.
thought,
Gangs.
talk about set them up for gang wars.
Yeah, I
Right?
agree. I agree.
It was always the three that, like, I lived on Stony, Eden Valley for a number of years.
Did you?
So, like 20 years ago, they still had the three. It's not something that's recent.
Mm-hmm. I just meant, because he was talking about the division where they had the funds and then the three worked together, as opposed to now they tried to separate the funds, so they will be
So that
competing.
each one will have have a.
Yeah, so rather than having
Yes,
one
exactly.
treatment center,
Right.
you know, they all have to make their own. Well,
Yeah,
that's
that
not going to
doesn't
work
work.
when they have 3,500 people to begin with.
Yeah.
You know, split that up 3 ways.
Or you're
Yes.
going to a school.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Children are all going to the same school.
Yeah.
Well, also it depends, you know, because I thought that they'd have a little more, a little bit more information too. Is Grey Eagles is owned by T apostrophe. I still call Sarcy.
Okay, yeah, to see.
Tsina, yeah, and it's also because they all border on each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's the other is that didn't quite mention where the revenue for Grey Eagles is going.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's the other. If they separate, one's going to have the revenue from that from a casino, and then the lake. I can never pronounce them. There's the Chiniki.
Like
And
the
it's got-
Chini. Okay.
Yeah, and it's you see it's got the lodge and the restaurant.
The Chiniki.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in behind there has got a conference center.
Yeah.
That's lovely. But I think that it's not sold as often as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the revenue from that is. Yeah.
Where does that go?
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Because I knew somebody who's gone to conferences there. It's absolutely beautiful. You would have no idea from the highway how absolutely beautiful and spiritual it is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I underlined this part in 1885. The spiritual practice called the Sundance was declared criminal, and a pass system was instituted where Indians could not leave the reserves without permission from the Indian agent. Talk about spiritual abuse at so many levels
God,
right
yes,
there in
yeah.
like 2 sentences.
Yeah.
Actually, that was 1 sentence.
Well, that was also and this is what I always thought was so interesting, is how they all became Roman Catholics. And I'm down at the Glenbow one day, and anyhow, the stories that I had heard about Father Lacombe and what a wonderful person he was. Well, there's a drawing, and it's literally the rival of Father Lacombe, and all you see is blood and tears and right? And it's the bloodshed and tears. And it was kind of like, oh, this was another Crusades.
Exactly.
It was another Crusades. Yeah.
Scott Milton was one of the few people who actually will use the term Canadian genocide.
Yeah.
And as a protester, I have no problem telling
it
people
definitely
it was.
It was, definitely.
Yeah. There are
yes.
dead babies still in the churches, like underneath and in
Yeah.
the backyards, and those children deserve proper burials.
Well, so did same with the residential schools.
Exactly.
The kids that died, nobody ever knew. None of them were counted. Parents would kind of like, kids didn't come home, right? And then by the time they came home, they'd lost their language. Couldn't
Mhm.
speak to their parents.
Isn't that awful? So yeah, and he never really talked much about that, but I guess that in
That's
the
a
scope,
different book.
exactly,
Different
in the
book.
scope of what we're talking
Yeah.
about.
I think one of the things that struck me was at the beginning of the book. It says one of their greatest obstacles is our attitude toward them.
Mhm.
Well, and that's the other is that there's still plenty of discrimination, and that's the other
Absolutely.
problem. Is people kind of like, I don't want to, right? Yeah, and then it'll never be fixed. It's kind of like, yeah, it can be. Yeah.
It could be fixed. My
Yeah.
my family, my mother is Native. I was with my father. My father's family and my father are all racist against Natives. And then I married my husband, and his family is all racist against Natives. So it's been very interesting.
How did you ever ask your father why he took up with your mother?
I have my own answers for that, or it must have been rebelling against his military dad.
Yeah.
So that's what I think it
Because
was.
that's the one that always amazes me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because that usually should soften those horrible racist things.
You'd think. And even growing up, they were against me getting my Native card, my Native status, against it fully and
Don't tell
completely.
anybody you're Native. Don't tell anybody you're Native.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And he didn't want me to be categorized. and you know they just seen it as such an evil, bad thing to be categorized as a Native. But I was born.
That's who you are.
Exactly. Born off the reserve. I've never lived in the reserve. I've never been raised by my mother. My mother is not Native in the sense that she has it taken out of her. Her mom went to the residential schools and is now a devout Catholic, as is my mother.
Mhm.
Yeah.
See, I did have a friend in high school, and she basically lived on a ranch, but her mother was Native, married a white man. She lost all her reserve rights.
Yeah.
And that I didn't know, and that's when she said, so my pal told me, she said, oh yes, if a Native woman marries a white man, she loses all of her treaty rights, but if a Native man marries a white woman, she gets all the treaty rights, even though neither one of them live on the reserve.
But that's not now.
Yeah, in
that's been
1987.
changed.
Did they change that?
Yeah.
Okay,
In
that was
1987,
not-
that changed, and that's
Yeah.
when there was controversy over me and my brother getting my Native status.
yeah.
And actually, because I'm like just at that cutoff, my daughter can't get Native
No.
status now.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I always say, oh, mission accomplished. All the whites have bred out the Native.
Yeah. and she said that basically she said, but this was the other, was, what was it? I can't remember, but she said it was kind of like the reason that they had designed that, because under no circumstances would white women ever marry Native men. And she said, so that always solved the problem.
Yeah,
And she told me all kinds of stuff that was very interesting.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so back to the idea of like racism, I believe it's still very rampant.
Oh, it's hugely
very
rampant. Hugely rampant.
And I think that's part of the reason why we're not seeing any change, because even though the media actually did their job for a day,
Yeah.
you know, we still are not seeing any change. So
Well, except I have to say, I was so pleased to see all those young boys out playing hockey, and everybody
Yes.
playing well together. That so warmed my heart.
my husband and I, before we had kids, were scuba diver instructors, and we taught all the Siksika Nation
Mhm.
firefighters how to scuba dive because that was part of their training.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the natives that I'm meeting today compared to what was 10 years ago,
10
20
years-
years
yeah,
ago,
exactly.
huge difference, and
Yeah.
you know, definitely assimilated.
Or, yeah.
But I think, is there a difference also between the natives who were part of the treaties and natives who were not part of the treaties?
I would think,
Like
hey?
in the territories or the Yukon.
Mhm.
I think that they weren't placed on reserves. I think
No,
it's a
they were
different-
all
it's
placed
a
on
different-
reserves.
Yeah.
Not in the Yukon.
Oh yeah, no, there's
In the north,
reserves up there.
there's
There's
treaties.
many reserves up there.
Yeah, it's kind of divided. The Denes are all divided into, I want to say, 4 different reserves that I can think of offhand. So, you know, it depends, because a lot of people say, "Oh, you're Dene. Which Dene are you?" And ask me specifically, and I'll have to tell them Yellowknife,
Hmm.
because even in Yellowknife there's the 2. So, yeah.
And there's a
Crazy.
couple in around Whitehorse too. There's a couple reserves around there.
Yeah. And then there's reserves that are not recognized by the
Mhm.
government.
Yeah.
Like there's one up right by Rocky that's like that, where there's a ton of natives there, but they're not given any native status.
Mhm.
So, and it's not considered a municipality, yet they're all living there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an unofficial reserve with no chance for real corruption anyway, because they're not getting any money from the
Mhm.
natives, so, or from the government. So I don't know. It's all messed up. But I think he highlighted that pretty good.
I thought it was interesting too when he was talking about the treaties, and he was talking about having some of the different groups of natives sign together, but they were sort of, I guess, enemies or opposing groups, yet they were lumped together,
Yeah.
saying,
And
"Oh,
they
you
couldn't
must
even
all
speak.
have common interests," and they couldn't even communicate with each other.
No.
And so they were signing something in a different language they probably didn't even know what it was half the time, or they got a poor translation of. And I didn't realize that, so I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, he covered that really well.
Yeah,
I really
mean, just
like
in terms
that.
of that, the cultural difference, it was curious to see how the Stony basically are related to the Dakotas.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite, just in terms of a historical
Oh, and this is
perspective,
the
it was
other,
quite
is
interesting.
some of them were very, very peaceful bands, and others were very, very,
Oh, very
warrior, yeah, real warriors, yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah.
What did you guys think of the Indian agent and their tyrannical rule? This one paragraph, it goes, the reserve Indians were controlled by the use of the Indian agents. This colonial practice would involve obtaining the collaboration of one or two families to help control the rest. The cooperation of these families would be obtained by favoring them with extra rations and privileges. The Indian agent had virtually absolute power. He determined who received rations and who did not. A person did not run for chief without the agent's consent. So
Well,
basically, they're the chief.
And that's
Well, I was gonna
that's what I
say-
was saying. We were talking about earlier. Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
exactly
that's
what they have
exactly
today.
what they learned. That's exactly what they've learned
Yeah.
now. That's how the
Yes.
chief
that's
is
why
still
it's-
running on those.
My mother-in-law says the native did it to themselves, and like
No.
this is the part that I want her to understand. Like, you don't understand how they were, taken away in the residential schools. You don't understand how there was a dictator placed telling people what to do.
And the other is that you basically you keep them poor and uneducated,
Yeah,
and basically is you break their spirit,
yeah.
and they can never get that back.
No.
And that part,
The other thing along that line is, there's a couple of families competing to be the favored
Yes.
family, so
Yes.
you essentially put the community at odds with each other, and then while you keep everyone fighting amongst themselves, no, they can't rise up all together
No,
and
no.
make a change, right?
Yeah.
So you gotta
Yeah.
keep it at bay by just having people fight amongst themselves
Yeah.
rather than agree on.
That's the key. Yeah, the key is education, though.
the key is education. Now, I have to say, this is slightly off topic, but it's still on topic, is that last night I'm watching the PBS, and it's on that prohibition, and how they brought prohibition in 1910. Well, exactly how the same, if you want Christian right, brought in prohibition, the same tactics, everything that they are doing is exactly what's going on with the Tea Party, and is exactly what's happened in this book.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
It's basically is the Christian, I know better than you, and the bullying, and putting people out of business, and all of that. And it just was fascinating on how you think things change, and nothing changes.
It's a system.
It's a system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And it's a handful of people. And a lot of times they were saying is that the people were not great successes until they got this one cause. And then basically is once they got their cause that's how they did their bullying.
What a
Well, I
shame.
mean, that's how dictatorships work.
Yeah. And the only thing that turned around the getting rid of was in the middle of the Depression. They knew it wasn't working, and crime was running rampant, and they thought, if we get rid of prohibition and we open the breweries, there'll be more jobs. Because it was the job loss that was also so huge at a time when nobody knew. But it was also is that they tied, what they also did to bring in the prohibition was World War I broke out, and all the breweries were owned by Germans. So they had basically people had all the anti-German and the vile propaganda and racism there. It was basically, as anybody who supported supported a brewery may as well have been dropping the bombs from Germany, and they hadn't even gotten in the war yet. Yeah, because the Americans are always the last to get into a war.
Unless they started.
Yes, unless they start. Yeah, it's true. Unless they started. Yes.
I found it scary how they're talking about, I can't remember the exact number, but like 2/3 of the students don't even go to school.
Right.
Because they were bullied or
Yes.
afraid to go. So essentially the school isn't even functioning as a school. It's just a sort of a babysitting service, but
Yeah.
not even, because
not even that.
they're talking about that people don't even show up. They, punch their card and then leave. So and
Yeah.
then the higher up people are shipping their kids to
Private schools.
private schools elsewhere. That
I had a girlfriend.
out there.
Eden Valley.
Yeah.
But I think that there's more than just, like, education, as you mentioned, it's essential. But I think even alongside that education, there has to be counseling.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking
Oh,
about
absolutely.
sexual abuse,
Oh,
major
yeah.
sexual abuse,
Alcoholism.
major alcohol
Oh,
abuse.
absolutely.
Incredible healing. And to just say, well, the kids are going to go to school and they're going to get this education, they're going to go out in the world. But, you know, we're talking about, you know, like, even if they do and go out in the world, what
What
we were
lessons?
seeing earlier are attitudes. They can go out in the world, but if you're going into even a store, you're working in a store and you think, or you even sense, nobody has to say anything, if you have a sense of this attitude toward me, are you going to want to come in every morning and work there? You know,
No way.
it's,
Oh, yeah.
it's,
See, I grew up in an alcoholic, where both my parents were alcoholic. So basically, it's basically, you've got two drunken parents. It's not like you can go home and do your homework in a
Oh,
safe
no.
environment. And I had a girlfriend who went up to teach at Little
There's
Buffalo.
not just one solution to it.
No, yeah. Went up to teach at Little Buffalo in 1976, right? When Alberta was booming, absolutely booming. Well, there was one budget cut made in the whole province. School buses on reserves. She said she got up to, and this is the Little Buffalo Lake, and that's where, and they had the big protest during the Calgary '88 Olympics. She said half the houses didn't have electricity, and of course it gets dark at 3 o'clock in the evening, you know. And she said it started out where the one school bus driver would pick up kids from one side of the reserve, bring them to class, and then the next day pick them up from the second. So she said every second day kids were getting to school, right? And then she said you couldn't give them homework because they don't have electricity, right? It's dark. You can't sit and do. So she literally came up with things to get them where they were going to be educated, and she came up with all kinds of ideas.
Well, that's what I was asking,
Yeah.
right? You have to improvise. You have
But
to find
she's the
different
one
ways
who
of
did.
getting-
She's the one who really did the improvising.
Yeah.
They need those people who are
And that's
willing
it. She
to
was. Yeah. So
put their
basically, is
energy into
that
it.
she said when they were having their big protest and they were, you know, basically blocking a road, all you saw them sitting there reading the newspapers. And she thought, if I've accomplished anything, I taught them how to read in a situation where that wasn't going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, you talk about sexual abuse and all that, but what about, I mean, I'm the only guy here, but nobody's talking about the abuse, the way women are treated in this reserve.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, that sadly that was also learned at the residential school.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely, but I mean,
And-
if I remember correctly, I mean, the
Domestic violence.
domestic violence, but I mean, it
Yeah.
seems like it's even within the Aboriginal or First Nations culture has shifted, right? Because in
They
the
learned.
past,
It was learnt in residential schools.
yeah, so in the past,
Yeah.
I mean, if you